You watch others effortlessly build networks and influence while your best efforts at connection fall flat, leaving you feeling invisible in social and professional circles. Every networking event becomes an awkward dance of forced conversations that lead nowhere, while others seem to magnetically attract opportunities through their relationships. I am Dale Carnegie, and I spent decades studying human nature, teaching millions of people how to transform their ability to connect, influence, and win genuine friendships that change everything. The principles I discovered through my research and personal experience will revolutionize how you approach every human interaction, turning you from someone who struggles with relationships into someone others naturally gravitate toward. These aren't just social tips. They are the fundamental laws of human connection that have transformed careers, built fortunes, and created lasting happiness for countless individuals. But first, like this video, subscribe for more life-changing wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to master the art of winning friends. Let me take you back to a small farm in Missouri, where a painfully shy boy struggled to speak up in his own home. That boy was me, and I can still feel the burning embarrassment of those early years when I would rather hide behind the barn than face a room full of people. My father was a farmer who believed hard work solved everything, but no amount of plowing fields could cure my terror of human interaction. I remember the first time I had to give a presentation at the local school. My hands shook so violently, I could barely hold my notes, and my voice cracked like I was going through puberty all over again. The other children laughed, and I wanted to disappear into the floorboards. That night, I made a promise to myself that would change everything. I would master this fear, or let it master me forever. When I left the farm to attend college, I discovered something that would become the foundation of my life's work. I noticed that the most successful students weren't necessarily the smartest ones. They were the ones who could connect with others. They had professors eating out of their hands, fellow students seeking their company, and opportunities flowing to them like water downhill. Meanwhile, I sat in the back corner, brilliant ideas trapped inside my head because I couldn't find the courage to share them. My breakthrough came during my teaching years in Warrensburg. Standing in front of a classroom of restless students, I realized something profound. These young people didn't care about my knowledge until they felt I cared about them. The moment I stopped trying to impress them with facts and started showing genuine interest in their lives, everything changed. They leaned forward instead of slouching back. They asked questions instead of watching the clock. They transformed from hostile strangers into eager learners. I began experimenting with different approaches. When Johnny struggled with mathematics, I didn't just explain the concept again. I found out he loved baseball and taught fractions through batting averages. When Mary seemed distracted, I discovered her family was facing financial hardship and found ways to make her feel valued and important in class. Each small success taught me that human beings are remarkably similar in their deepest needs. They want to feel understood, appreciated, and significant. But my real education came from watching the students who naturally connected with others. There was one young man, Robert, who wasn't particularly handsome or wealthy, yet everyone wanted to be around him. I studied him like a scientist studying a rare specimen. I noticed he remembered details about people's lives that others forgot. He asked questions that made people feel interesting. He had this way of making each person feel like the most important person in the room when he spoke with them. The revelation hit me like lightning. Robert wasn't born with some magical gift, had simply discovered principles that anyone could learn. He was applying laws of human nature as reliable as the laws of physics. This wasn't about personality or natural charm. It was about understanding how human beings really work beneath the surface. I started keeping detailed notes about every interaction I observed, every technique that worked, every approach that failed. I became obsessed with understanding why some teachers could inspire while others merely instructed, why some people attracted friends effortlessly while others repelled them despite good intentions. The answers weren't found in psychology textbooks. They were hiding in plain sight in every coffee shop, every classroom, every family dinner. Years later, when I moved to New York City to pursue acting, these observations proved more valuable than any dramatic training. The theater world was brutal, filled with rejection and competition, but I began to notice patterns. The actors who succeeded weren't always the most talented. They were the ones who could build relationships with directors, producers, and fellow actors. They understood that their career depended less on their ability to memorize lines and more on their ability to make others want to work with them. My acting career in New York taught me a harsh truth. Talent without the ability to connect with people is like a beautiful song played in an empty room. I watched gifted actors struggle for scraps, while others with half their ability landed starring roles simply because directors enjoyed working with them. This reality forced me to confront a fundamental question that would reshape my entire life. What if success had less to do with what you know and more to do with how well you understand people? The answer came to me in an unexpected place, the YMCA on 125th Street in Manhattan. I had started teaching public speaking classes to make ends meet, but what I discovered there would become my life's calling. These weren't polished executives or natural performers. They were ordinary working people who trembled at the thought of speaking to a group. Salesmen who could barely introduce themselves. Businessmen whose voices shook when presenting to their own employees. Housewives who felt invisible in their own social circles. I remember my first class vividly. 12 people sat rigidly in folding chairs, looking like they were facing a firing squad rather than a speaking opportunity. Traditional methods had failed these people. Before lectures about voice projection and proper posture meant nothing when they were paralyzed by fear. So I tried something different. Instead of teaching them how to speak, I began teaching them how to connect. I noticed something remarkable happening. When I encouraged students to talk about subjects they genuinely cared about, their families, their work, their passions, their fear disappeared. Their voices strengthened, their postures straightened, and their eyes came alive. The magic wasn't in the technique, it was in helping them remember that communication is simply one human being sharing something meaningful with another. But the real breakthrough came when I started observing what happened after class. Students who had been strangers were forming friendships, business deals were being discussed, social invitations were exchanged. The skills they were learning weren't just making them better speakers, they were transforming their entire lives. I realized I wasn't teaching public speaking. I was teaching the fundamental art of human relations. One student changed everything for me. Margaret was a secretary who had been passed over for promotion repeatedly. She was competent, dedicated, and intelligent, but she seemed to repel people without understanding why. After just 6 weeks in my class, she received the promotion she had been seeking for 3 years. When I asked her what had changed, she said something that haunts me to this day. "Mr. Carnegie, I finally learned to see other people as more important than my own nervousness." That comment crystallized everything I had been observing. The students who transformed most dramatically weren't the ones who memorized the most techniques. They were the ones who genuinely shifted their focus from themselves to others. They stopped worrying about how they appeared and started caring about how they could serve, interest, and appreciate the people around them. I began systematically studying my most successful students. What made them magnetic? What principles were they applying, often unconsciously? I filled notebook after notebook with observations, patterns, and insights. I discovered that effective human relations followed predictable laws, just like physics or chemistry. Master these laws, and you could predict and influence human behavior with remarkable accuracy. The transformation in my own life was undeniable. As I applied these principles consistently, opportunities began flowing to me in ways that seemed almost magical. Publishers sought me out. Speaking engagements multiplied. Influential people wanted to meet with me. But most importantly, my relationships deepened and became more fulfilling than I had ever imagined possible. I realized that what I was discovering wasn't new. It was ancient wisdom that had been overlooked in our modern rush toward technical knowledge. Great leaders throughout history had intuitively understood these principles. Now I was organizing them into a system that anyone could learn and apply. The YMCA classes became a laboratory where I could test and refine these ideas. Every technique had to prove itself in real life, with real people facing real challenges. If it didn't work consistently for ordinary people in ordinary situations, it didn't make it into my teaching. This practical approach separated my philosophy from academic theories that sounded good in textbooks but failed in the machines of actual human interaction. Word spread quickly about what was happening in those classes. Other YMCAs requested similar programs. Corporations began asking me to train their employees. I knew I had discovered something powerful, systematic approach to the most important skill any person could possess, the ability to work successfully with other human beings. The first law I discovered came from one of the most painful lessons of my life. I was managing a small theater production, and one of our lead actors kept missing his cues. Night after night, he would enter late or forget his lines, and I could feel my frustration building like pressure in a steam kettle. Finally, I exploded. In front of the entire cast, I criticized his professionalism, questioned his commitment, and made it clear that his performance was unacceptable. The next day, he quit. But worse than losing an actor was losing a friend. I had humiliated someone I genuinely cared about, and for what? To make myself feel better, to assert my authority. The production suffered, the cast became tense, and I learned a lesson that would shape everything that followed. Criticism never achieves what we think it will. Years later, I discovered that Abraham Lincoln had learned this same lesson during the Civil War, when General Meade failed to pursue Lee's army after Gettysburg, potentially ending the war. Lincoln wrote a scorching letter of condemnation, but he never sent it. Instead, he filed it away and worked to maintain his relationship with Meade. Lincoln understood something that took me years to grasp. Criticism doesn't change behavior, it destroys relationships. I began studying this phenomenon obsessively. What happens when we criticize someone? We think we're helping them improve, but what we're actually doing is attacking their self-esteem, triggering their defense mechanisms, and making them determined to prove us wrong. The human ego is so fragile that even the gentlest criticism can feel like a personal assault. In my classes, I started conducting experiments. I would ask students to spend 1 week avoiding all criticism, condemnation, and complaints. The results were astonishing. Marriages improved. Workplace relationships strengthened. Children became more cooperative. It seemed almost too simple to be true, but the evidence was overwhelming. One student, a factory foreman named William, transformed his entire department by applying this principle. For years, he had managed through criticism, pointing out every mistake and demanding better performance. His workers did the minimum required and no more. But when he stopped criticizing and started finding things to appreciate, productivity soared. Absenteeism dropped. Workers began suggesting improvements on their own initiative. The psychological reason behind this transformation is profound. When we criticize someone, we're essentially saying, "I'm superior to you. I'm smart enough to see your flaws and important enough to point them out." This immediately puts the other person in a defensive position. They stop listening to our message and start protecting their self-image. Even if our criticism is completely accurate, it becomes worthless because the person receiving it cannot accept it without feeling diminished. I learned to ask myself a crucial question before speaking. Will saying this help the other person, or will it just make me feel better? Most criticism falls into the second category. We criticize because it makes us feel superior, not because it helps others improve. This realization was humbling but liberating. But avoiding criticism doesn't mean accepting poor performance or inappropriate behavior. Instead, I discovered more effective alternatives. Rather than saying, "You're always late," I learned to say, "I value our meetings and want to make sure we have enough time to cover everything important. What can we do to ensure we start on time?" The first approach attacks the person. The second addresses the behavior while preserving dignity. The key is understanding that people don't change when they feel attacked. They change when they feel supported. When someone feels criticized, all their energy goes toward defending themselves. When they feel understood and valued, that same energy can be directed toward improvement. This principle revolutionized my own relationships. My marriage became more harmonious when I stopped pointing out my wife's minor flaws and started appreciating her countless contributions. My friendships deepened when I released my need to be right and focused on being helpful. My professional relationships flourished when I learned to address problems without attacking people. The most powerful example came from my work with a difficult client who constantly complained about everything: the service, the schedule, the results. My instinct was to defend myself and point out his unreasonable expectations. Instead, I bit my tongue and asked, "What would make this experience better for you?" That simple question, free of criticism or defensiveness, opened a conversation that led to a stronger partnership and better outcomes for everyone involved. Remember, when dealing with people, we're not dealing with logical creatures. We're dealing with emotional beings driven by pride, ego, and the desperate need to feel important. Criticism wounds that pride, deflates that ego, and makes people feel small. No matter how justified your criticism might be, it will always do more harm than good to the relationship. If criticism is the quickest way to destroy a relationship, appreciation is the fastest way to build one. I discovered this truth through a chance encounter with Dale Carnegie, the steel magnate who would become both my inspiration and my namesake. I was interviewing him for a magazine article, expecting to write about his business strategies. Instead, I stumbled upon something far more valuable. Carnegie told me about his approach to managing thousands of employees across his steel empire. "I never criticize a man for making an honest mistake," he said, "but I never let good work go unnoticed either." He explained how he had developed a systematic approach to recognizing and appreciating his workers' efforts. The results were extraordinary: lower turnover, higher productivity, and fierce loyalty from people who could have worked anywhere. But what struck me most was how Carnegie spoke about his own employees. His eyes lit up when he described their innovations, their dedication, their small acts of excellence that others might overlook. He wasn't faking this enthusiasm. He genuinely saw and valued the good in people. This wasn't a management technique. It was a way of seeing the world. I left that interview determined to understand the psychology behind appreciation. Why did it work so powerfully? The answer lies in one of the deepest human needs: the hunger for appreciation. We can live weeks without food, days without water, minutes without air, but we cannot live fulfilled lives without feeling valued and appreciated. In my classes, I began teaching people to become appreciation detectives, actively searching for things to value in others. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. A struggling salesman named Charles increased his income by 400% in 6 months, simply by learning to appreciate his customers genuinely. A mother rebuilt her relationship with her rebellious teenager by focusing on his positive qualities instead of his mistakes. But I learned there's a crucial difference between appreciation and flattery. Flattery is telling someone what you think they want to hear, whether you believe it or not. Appreciation is expressing genuine recognition for something valuable you see in another person. People can sense the difference immediately, and flattery actually repels, while appreciation attracts. The key to honest appreciation is training yourself to notice the good that already exists. Every person you meet has done something worthy of recognition, completed a difficult task, shown kindness to others, persevered through challenges, demonstrated a skill or talent. Most of this good work goes completely unnoticed because we're so focused on problems and mistakes. I made appreciation a daily practice in my own life. Each morning, I would identify at least 3 people I would genuinely appreciate that day. Not generic compliments, but specific recognition for something they had actually done or achieved. The response was remarkable. People began seeking me out, sharing their ideas with me, going out of their way to help me with my projects. One of my most powerful appreciation experiences involved a young janitor at the YMCA where I taught. Everyone ignored him, treating him like part of the furniture. But I noticed how thoroughly he cleaned, how he always had a smile ready, how he took pride in making the building welcoming for everyone. One day, I stopped and told him specifically what I had observed and how much his work meant to the success of our programs. Tears came to his eyes. He told me that in 5 years of working there, no one had ever acknowledged his efforts. That simple appreciation transformed not just his attitude but his performance. He began taking initiative, suggesting improvements, and eventually worked his way up to become the building supervisor. This experience taught me that appreciation has a multiplying effect. When you genuinely appreciate someone, they don't just feel good, they become motivated to earn more appreciation through even better performance. It creates an upward spiral that benefits everyone involved. But appreciation must be specific to be effective. Saying good job is pleasant but forgettable. Saying the way you handled that difficult customer with patience and creativity not only solved the problem, but made him feel valued as a person is appreciation that will be remembered and repeated. I also discovered that appreciation works best when it focuses on effort and character rather than just results. Anyone can appreciate success, but recognizing the hard work, persistence, and positive attitude that led to success touches something deeper in the human heart. The most profound lesson about appreciation came from observing my own response when others appreciated me genuinely. I found myself working harder, thinking more creatively, and going further out of my way to help those who had taken the time to recognize my efforts. I realized that appreciation doesn't just make people feel good, it actually brings out their best qualities and highest performance. In our criticism-heavy world, appreciation has become a rare gift. Most people are starving for genuine recognition. When you learn to give honest, specific, heartfelt appreciation consistently, you become like a source of water in a desert. People will remember how you made them feel long after they forget what you said or did. The third law came to me through a humbling failure that nearly ended my career before it began. I was trying to convince a theater owner to book one of my speaking engagements. I spent 30 minutes explaining why it would be good for me, how I needed the exposure, how it would help establish my reputation, how much the fee would mean to my struggling finances. He listened politely and then declined, walking home dejected. I realized my fundamental mistake. I had spent the entire conversation talking about what I wanted, never once considering what he might want. I had been like a fisherman using cake as bait because I loved cake, ignoring the fact that fish prefer worms. This revelation led me to study one of the most successful men of my era, Henry Ford. Ford revolutionized not just manufacturing but human motivation. He understood that you can't motivate people by telling them what you want to motivate them, by helping them get what they want. When he doubled his workers' wages, critics called him crazy, but Ford knew that well-paid workers would become customers for his cars. He aroused in them an eager want for better lives, and they responded with loyalty and productivity that made him one of the richest men in America. I began applying this principle systematically. Instead of asking, "What do I want from this person?" I learned to ask, "What does this person want, and how can I help them get it?" The change in my results was immediate and dramatic. When I returned to that theater owner, I took a completely different approach. I had researched his business and discovered he was struggling to attract younger audiences to classical performances. Instead of talking about my needs, I focused on his. I showed him how my speaking style and topics would appeal to younger demographics, how my presentation could be positioned to draw new audiences to his venue, and how this could solve his specific business challenge. He not only booked the engagement, but asked me to return quarterly. The content of my presentation hadn't changed, only my approach. I had learned to see the situation through his eyes and speak to his interests rather than mine. This principle transforms every aspect of human relations. In my classes, I taught people to become students of human motivation. A mother struggling with her teenager learned to stop nagging about homework and start connecting academic success to the teenager's dream of becoming a pilot. A salesman increased his income dramatically by learning to present his products as solutions to his customers' specific problems, rather than reciting features and benefits. The key insight is that every person is fundamentally selfish, not in a cruel way, but in a natural, survival-based way. We're all primarily concerned with our own problems, desires, needs, and goals. This isn't a character flaw, it's human nature. When you understand and work with this reality, instead of fighting it, you become incredibly influential. But arousing eager want isn't manipulation, it's service. True influence comes from genuinely helping others achieve their goals. When you can show someone how your proposal, idea, or request actually serves their interests, you're not tricking them, you're providing value. I learned this lesson powerfully when working with a difficult employee who constantly resisted new procedures. Traditional approaches had failed orders, threats, and logical explanations all bounced off him like rain off a roof. Then I discovered his real motivation. He was terrified of looking incompetent in front of younger employees. Instead of demanding compliance, I reframed the new procedures as a way for him to mentor junior staff members, positioning him as the expert who would help others master these important skills. His resistance evaporated instantly. He became one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the changes because I had connected them to what he truly wanted: respect and recognition as a valuable senior employee. The most sophisticated application of this principle involves understanding that people often have multiple, sometimes conflicting wants. A business owner might want higher profits, but also want to be seen as ethical. An employee might want advancement, but also want work-life balance. The art lies in finding solutions that satisfy multiple desires simultaneously. I discovered that the most successful people I knew were masters at this principle. They had trained themselves to see situations from others' perspectives so naturally that it became second nature. They asked better questions. What keeps this person awake at night? What would make them feel successful? What are they afraid of losing? This principle also taught me the importance of patience. Sometimes you can't immediately see how to connect your goals with someone else's wants. But if you keep observing, listening, and asking questions, the connection usually becomes clear. The investment in understanding others' motivations always pays dividends. Remember, you can get anything you want in life if you help enough other people get what they want. This isn't just a nice philosophy, it's the most practical approach to achieving your goals while building lasting, mutually beneficial relationships. The fourth law revealed itself to me through a chance encounter that changed my understanding of human magnetism forever. I was attending a reception in New York, feeling awkward and invisible among the sophisticated crowd. Then I noticed a woman who seemed to be the center of attention wherever she went. She wasn't the most beautiful person in the room, nor the most elegantly dressed, yet people gravitated toward her like moths to a flame. Curious, I positioned myself close enough to observe her conversations. What I discovered was revolutionary. She wasn't talking about herself at all. Instead, she was asking others about their work, their travels, their families, their interests. But these weren't polite, surface-level questions. She listened to the answers with genuine fascination, asked follow-up questions that showed she was truly engaged, and remembered details from previous conversations. I watched a distinguished businessman light up as she asked about his recent trip to South America. I saw a shy young woman blossom when asked about her artwork. Every person she spoke with left the conversation feeling more interesting, more important, more valued than when it began. She had mastered the secret of making others feel like the most fascinating people in the room. This observation challenged everything I thought I knew about social success. I had assumed that interesting people were those who had interesting things to say about themselves. But this woman proved that the most magnetic people are those who are genuinely interested in others. She had discovered a fundamental truth. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. I decided to experiment with this principle in my own life. At the next social gathering I attended, I made a conscious decision to focus entirely on learning about others. Instead of waiting for opportunities to share my own experiences, I asked questions and listened with genuine curiosity. The results were immediate and remarkable. People who had barely noticed me before sought me out for conversation. I received more dinner invitations in 1 month than in the previous year, but I quickly learned that this interest must be authentic to be effective. People can sense the difference between genuine curiosity and manipulative questioning. When your interest is real, it shows in your body language, your eye contact, the quality of your questions, and your emotional responses to their answers. When it's forced or strategic, people feel used rather than valued. The breakthrough came when I stopped seeing social interactions as performances where I needed to impress others and started seeing them as opportunities to discover fascinating things about fellow human beings. Every person, I realized, has a unique story, interesting experiences, special knowledge, and perspectives that could enrich my own understanding of life. I began approaching conversations like an explorer discovering new territory. What challenges was this person facing? What victories had they achieved? What dreams were they pursuing? What wisdom had they gained from their experiences? This shift in perspective transformed not just my social success, but my entire worldview. I stopped being the center of my own universe and discovered a much larger, more interesting world filled with remarkable people. One of my most powerful applications of this principle involved a difficult business relationship. I was working with a contractor who seemed hostile and uncooperative. Traditional approaches had failed. He responded to friendliness with suspicion and to directness with resistance. Then I remembered the fourth law and decided to become genuinely interested in him as a person. I discovered he was passionate about woodworking and had built beautiful furniture as a hobby. I asked him about his techniques, his favorite projects, the challenges of working with different types of wood. His entire demeanor changed. The hostile contractor became an enthusiastic craftsman, eager to share his knowledge and expertise. This genuine interest in his passion created a connection that transformed our working relationship. This experience taught me that everyone is an expert in something. Everyone has knowledge, experiences, or perspectives that could teach you something valuable. When you approach people with this assumption, you naturally become more interested in them, and they respond by becoming more open and cooperative with you. I also learned that interested people ask better questions, instead of "how are you?", which invites a superficial response. Genuinely interested people ask, "What's the most exciting thing happening in your work right now?" Or "What's been the highlight of your week?" These questions invite people to share what's really important to them. The most profound aspect of this principle is how it changes you. When you become genuinely interested in others, you stop being self-conscious because you're no longer focused on yourself. You stop worrying about making a good impression because you're too busy being impressed by others. You stop feeling socially anxious because you have a clear purpose in every interaction, learning about and appreciating the person in front of you. This principle also creates a positive cycle. When you show genuine interest in others, they feel valued and important. When people feel valued by you, they begin to value you in return. They start sharing more openly, trusting you with important information, and seeking your company. Your genuine interest becomes the foundation for deeper, more meaningful relationships that enrich both your life and theirs. The fifth law seemed almost too simple to be significant until I conducted an experiment that changed my perspective on human nature forever. I was struggling with a particularly grim period in my life. Financial pressures, professional setbacks, and personal disappointments had left me feeling defeated. My natural expression had become a reflection of my inner state, serious, worried, and uninviting. One morning, I made a conscious decision to smile at every person I encountered, regardless of how I felt inside. I wasn't feeling happy, but I forced my facial muscles into a smile anyway. The results were so immediate and dramatic that I initially dismissed them as coincidence. Strangers smiled back. The usually gruff doorman at my building greeted me warmly. A difficult client who had been avoiding my calls suddenly became responsive and friendly. By the end of the day, I felt genuinely better, not because my circumstances had changed, but because the world had responded to me differently. Intrigued, I began studying the psychology behind smiling. I discovered that a smile is a universal language that transcends cultural barriers, language differences, and social boundaries. But more importantly, I learned that smiling doesn't just affect others, it actually changes your own emotional state through what scientists would later call facial feedback. I started observing successful people more carefully and noticed that the most influential among them shared one common characteristic. They smiled easily and naturally. They weren't necessarily happier than others, but they had learned that a genuine smile opens doors that remain closed to serious, stern expressions. The key word is genuine. I learned to distinguish between a real smile and a fake one. A real smile involves not just the mouth, but the entire face, especially the eyes. When you smile genuinely, your eyes crinkle slightly at the corners, your cheeks lift, and your whole expression becomes animated. People can sense the difference between this authentic expression and a forced, mechanical grimace. But how do you smile genuinely when you don't feel like smiling? I discovered the secret lies in finding anything that you can honestly appreciate about the person in front of you or the situation you're in. Maybe you appreciate their willingness to meet with you, their interesting choice of clothing, or simply the fact that they're another human being trying to make their way in the world. I practiced this approach with a particularly challenging business associate who seemed determined to make every interaction difficult. Instead of matching his negative energy with my own serious expression, I consciously found things to appreciate about him: his punctuality, his attention to detail, his obvious intelligence. When I expressed this appreciation through a genuine smile, his attitude gradually softened. What had been adversarial meetings became collaborative, problem-solving sessions. The The power of a smile extends far beyond face-to-face interactions. I learned that people can hear a smile in your voice during telephone conversations. When I started smiling while making important phone calls, my success rate in achieving my objectives increased dramatically. The warmth that came through my voice when I smiled made people more receptive to my ideas and more willing to help. I also discovered that smiling has a compound effect. When you smile at someone, they're more likely to smile at the next person they encounter. Your smile ripples outward, creating a chain reaction of positive interactions that can brighten many people's days. You become a source of light in a world that often feels dark and serious. One of my most memorable applications of this principle involved a hostile audience at one of my speaking engagements. The group had been forced to attend my presentation and made their resentment obvious through crossed arms, frowns, and general body language that screamed resistance. Instead of responding to their hostility with seriousness, I began with a genuine smile and a story that acknowledged their situation. With humor and understanding, that smile, combined with my recognition of their feelings, completely transformed the atmosphere. Faces relaxed, arms uncrossed, and what could have been a miserable experience for everyone became an engaging and productive session. The smile served as a bridge that allowed me to connect with people who had initially seen me as an enemy. I learned that smiling is particularly powerful in difficult situations. When someone is angry, upset, or frustrated, the last thing they expect is a genuine smile. This unexpected response often disarms their negativity and creates space for more constructive interaction. It doesn't mean you're dismissing their concerns, it means you're approaching the situation with warmth rather than defensiveness. The most profound lesson about smiling came from understanding its effect on my own psychology. I discovered that by changing my facial expression, I could actually influence my emotional state. When I smiled consistently, I began to notice more things to smile about. My perspective shifted from focusing on problems to appreciating possibilities. A smile costs nothing but creates everything. It enriches those who receive it without making poorer those who give it. It takes but a moment, but the memory of it sometimes lasts forever. None is so rich or mighty that they can get along without it, and none is so poor that they cannot be made richer by its benefits. The sixth law humbled me more than any other because it exposed my own self-centeredness in the starkest possible way. For years, I had been terrible with names, consistently forgetting them within minutes of introductions. I told myself it didn't matter, people would understand, and surely my other qualities compensated for this minor weakness. I was completely wrong. The wake-up call came during a reception where I encountered someone I had met several times before. When he greeted me enthusiastically by name and asked about a project I had mentioned months earlier, I stood there mortified, unable to remember his name or even place where we had met. The disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. In that moment, I realized that by failing to remember his name, I had essentially told him he wasn't important enough to remember. This experience led me to study one of the most politically successful men of my time, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt had an almost supernatural ability to remember names and personal details about people he had met, sometimes years earlier. Political opponents who intended to challenge him would find themselves disarmed when he greeted them warmly by name and asked about their families or personal interests. I learned that Roosevelt kept detailed notes about people he met, reviewing them before social events and political meetings. But more importantly, he understood that a person's name is, to them, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. When you remember and use someone's name, you're acknowledging their individual existence and worth in a way that touches something deep in their psychology. Determined to master this skill, I began developing a systematic approach to remembering names. The first step was recognizing that I hadn't been forgetting names, had never really heard them in the first place. During introductions, I was usually too focused on making a good impression or thinking about what I would say next to pay attention to the most important information being shared. I learned to concentrate completely on the moment of introduction. When someone said their name, I would repeat it immediately. Nice to meet you, Robert. I would ask about the spelling if it was unusual or confirm the pronunciation if I was uncertain. This simple act of repetition and clarification not only helped me remember, but showed the other person that their name mattered to me. I also began associating names with memorable characteristics or creating mental pictures. If I met someone named Rose, I might visualize a rose in connection with a distinctive feature about them. For David, I might think of the biblical David and connect it to something about their personality or appearance. These associations, however, simple or silly, dramatically improved my retention. But the real transformation came when I started using people's names consistently throughout our conversations. Instead of saying you constantly, I would weave their name naturally into our dialogue. That's an interesting perspective, Margaret. Robert, I'd love to hear more about that project. This practice served multiple purposes. It reinforced the name in my memory, while making the other person feel recognized and valued. The impact on my relationships was immediate and profound. People began responding to me more warmly, sharing more personal information, and seeking me out for future conversations. I realized that using someone's name correctly and frequently was like giving them a small gift every time I spoke it. One of the most powerful demonstrations of this principle occurred during a difficult negotiation with a potential business partner. The man had a complex foreign name that most people mispronounced or avoided using altogether. I took extra care to learn the correct pronunciation and used his name several times during our first meeting. His entire demeanor changed. He later told me that my respect for his name convinced him I would respect him as a person and as a business partner. I discovered that remembering names becomes easier when you genuinely care about people as individuals. When you're truly interested in someone, their name becomes important because it represents their unique identity. The difficulty most people have with names stems from self-absorption. They're too focused on themselves to invest attention in others. I also learned that admitting when you've forgotten a name, rather than avoiding the issue, actually strengthens relationships. Saying, I apologize, but I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly, shows respect and genuine interest. People appreciate honesty about name confusion far more than awkward avoidance. The most sophisticated application of this principle involves remembering not just names, but personal details associated with them. When you can greet someone with "Hello, James, how did your daughter's recital go?" you demonstrate a level of personal attention that most people rarely experience. This kind of detailed remembering transforms casual acquaintances into meaningful connections. I began keeping a simple system for tracking important people in my life: their names, family details, interests, and important events. Before social gatherings or business meetings, I would review these notes. The investment of a few minutes in preparation paid enormous dividends in relationship building. Remember, people's names are more than just labels, they're core components of their identity. When you remember and use someone's name, you're acknowledging their individual worth and importance. When you forget or mispronounce it, you're sending the message that they don't matter enough for you to pay attention. In a world where most people feel invisible and unimportant, the simple act of remembering and using names becomes a powerful tool for connection and influence. The seventh law came to me through one of the most embarrassing professional moments of my life. I was meeting with a potential major client, a successful businessman who could transform my career if I impressed him. I had prepared extensively, rehearsing compelling stories about my successes, brilliant insights about his industry, and persuasive arguments for why he should work with me for 45 minutes. I dazzled him with my expertise, wit, and enthusiasm. I thought I had delivered the performance of a lifetime. As I prepared to ask for his business, he smiled politely and said, "Thank you for your time, Mr. Carnegie. I'll be in touch." I never heard from him again. Months later, through a mutual acquaintance, I learned what had gone wrong. He described me as impressive but self-absorbed, and said he felt like I had been more interested in hearing my self-talk than in understanding his needs. That feedback hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on being interesting that I had failed to be interested. This failure led me to study the most successful people I knew, and I discovered something remarkable. The most influential people were often the quietest in conversations. They asked thoughtful questions and listened intently to the answers. They made others feel heard, understood, and valued. They had mastered what I came to recognize as the rarest and most powerful social skill, the ability to listen. I began experimenting with listening as a conscious practice. In my next important meeting, I reversed my approach completely. Instead of trying to impress, I focused entirely on understanding. I asked about the client's challenges, goals, concerns, and dreams. I listened not just to their words, but to their emotions, their frustrations, their hopes. The transformation was magical. The client opened up in ways I hadn't expected, sharing not just business needs but personal concerns that were affecting his decisions. By the end of our conversation, he was asking me how I could help him rather than me selling him on my services. I learned that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, and the best way to show you care is to listen. But I quickly discovered that most people are terrible listeners, myself included. We listen with the intent to reply rather than to understand. While others are speaking, we're formulating our response, waiting for our turn to talk, or judging what they're saying. This isn't listening, it's preparing to speak. True listening requires emptying your mind of your own agenda and creating space for the other person's thoughts and feelings. It means being genuinely curious about their perspective, even when it differs from your own. It means asking follow-up questions that show you're engaged and want to understand more deeply. I learned to listen with my whole body. Eye contact showed I was present and engaged. Leaning slightly forward demonstrated interest. Nodding and small verbal acknowledgements like "I see" or "that must have been challenging" encouraged the speaker to continue. These physical cues were as important as any words I might say. One of my most powerful listening experiences involved a woman who had been struggling with a difficult family situation. Instead of offering advice or sharing similar experiences from my own life, I simply listened. For over an hour, I asked gentle questions and reflected back what I heard, allowing her to explore her own thoughts and feelings. At the end of our conversation, she thanked me profusely for my wise counsel. I realized I had barely spoken, yet she felt I had provided exactly what she needed. By listening deeply, I had given her the space to find her own solutions. This experience taught me that listening is often more valuable than speaking. I discovered that good listening has a therapeutic quality. When people feel truly heard, they relax, open up, and begin to trust. They start sharing not just facts, but feelings, not just problems, but fears and hopes. This deeper level of communication creates bonds that superficial conversation never can. But listening isn't passive, it's an active skill that requires practice and intention. I learned to listen for emotions behind words, for what wasn't being said as much as what was. I began asking questions that helped people explore their own thoughts. How did that make you feel? What concerns you most about this situation? What would an ideal outcome look like to you? The business applications of deep listening were remarkable. When I truly listened to clients, I could identify needs they hadn't even articulated themselves. I could craft solutions that addressed not just their stated problems, but their underlying concerns. This approach led to more successful projects and longer-lasting business relationships. I also learned that listening builds trust faster than any other communication skill. When people feel heard and understood, they begin to see you as someone who cares about them as individuals. This perception of caring is the foundation of all influence and persuasion. The most challenging aspect of becoming a good listener was overcoming my own ego. I had to release my need to be seen as clever, knowledgeable, or important. I had to find satisfaction in helping others feel clever, knowledgeable, and important instead. This shift in focus from self-promotion to service was difficult but transformative. In our noisy, distracted world, the ability to give someone your complete attention has become increasingly rare and valuable. When you listen deeply to another person, you're giving them one of the most precious gifts possible, the experience of being truly understood. The eighth law revealed itself during a dinner party where I watched a master at work without initially realizing what I was witnessing. The host had invited a diverse group of guests: a botanist, a musician, an architect, a chef, and several business people. I expected typical social small talk, but one guest transformed every conversation he joined. When speaking with the botanist, he asked fascinating questions about rare orchids. With the musician, he discussed the emotional impact of different musical keys. He engaged the architect about the psychological effects of building design and asked the chef about the cultural history of various cuisines. Each person became animated, passionate, and thoroughly engaged when he shifted the conversation to their area of expertise and personal interest. I realized this man wasn't exceptionally knowledgeable about all these subjects. He was exceptionally curious about people and what mattered to them. He had discovered that everyone is an expert in something. Everyone has passions that light them up, and everyone loves to share what they care about with someone who shows genuine interest. This observation challenged my approach to conversation completely. I had been operating under the assumption that to be interesting, I needed to have interesting things to say about myself. But this man proved that to be interesting, you need to be interested in others specifically, interested in what interests them. I began studying people's interests more systematically. I discovered that everyone carries invisible signs advertising what matters most to them. A woman's choice of jewelry might reveal her artistic sensibilities. A man's careful attention to his car might indicate his appreciation for craftsmanship and engineering. Someone's book selection, the photos on their desk, their choice of hobbies, all of these provided clues to their genuine interests. The key was learning to become a detective of human passion. Instead of making assumptions about what should interest someone based on their profession or appearance, I learned to ask questions that revealed what actually interested them. What's the most exciting project you're working on right now? What got you interested in this field originally? What aspect of your work do you find most rewarding? One of my most successful applications of this principle involved a potential business partner who seemed cold and uninterested during our initial meetings. Traditional relationship building approaches had failed. He responded to friendliness with suspicion and to business talk with boredom. Then I noticed a small, intricately carved wooden box on his desk. When I asked about it, his entire demeanor changed. He explained that he collected antique puzzle boxes from around the world, showed me how this particular one opened, and shared stories about his travels to find rare examples. For the next hour, we talked about craftsmanship, history, and the ingenuity of ancient puzzle makers. That conversation, focused entirely on his passion, became the foundation of a profitable and lasting business relationship. This experience taught me that everyone has at least one subject about which they become eloquent, enthusiastic, and engaging. The challenge is discovering what that subject is and creating opportunities for them to share their knowledge and passion. I learned that talking about others' interests serves multiple psychological needs simultaneously. It makes them feel heard and valued, it positions them as the expert, and it allows them to share something meaningful about themselves. When someone talks about their genuine interests, they're sharing a piece of their identity, and your attention to that sharing creates a deeper connection than surface-level social interaction. But this principle requires genuine curiosity to be effective. People can sense when your interest is authentic versus when you're simply using a technique to manipulate them. The difference lies in your motivation. Are you asking about their interests because you truly want to understand them better, or because you want something from them? I discovered that authentic interest in others' passions often led to unexpected learning opportunities for me. The botanist taught me about the intricate relationships in ecosystems. The chef shared insights about cultural history through food. The architect helped me understand how physical spaces influence human behavior. By focusing on others' interests, I expanded my own knowledge and perspective dramatically. The business applications were remarkable. When I learned about clients' personal interests, I could connect with them on a deeper level than my competitors, who focused only on business matters. I could remember and follow up on topics that mattered to them personally, creating relationships that transcended mere commercial transactions. I also learned that this principle works powerfully in written communication. A simple postscript mentioning something related to their interests. P.S. I saw an article about that rare stamp collection you mentioned could transform a routine business letter into a personal connection. The most sophisticated application involved connecting people's interests to business decisions. When I understood what someone was passionate about, I could often frame business proposals in ways that appealed to those deeper interests. A client passionate about innovation would respond to proposals emphasizing cutting-edge approaches. Someone interested in craftsmanship would appreciate attention to quality and detail. This principle taught me that everyone wants to feel interesting and important. When you talk about what interests them most, you're giving them an opportunity to feel both. You're acknowledging that their knowledge and passion have value, and you're investing your time and attention in understanding what matters to them. The ninth law emerged from studying the most beloved leader I ever encountered, Charles Schwab, the steel magnate who commanded fierce loyalty from thousands of workers. When I asked him the secret of his leadership success, his answer surprised me. I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among people my greatest asset, he said, and the way to develop the best that is in a person is by appreciation and encouragement. But Schwab went beyond simple appreciation. He had mastered the art of making every person feel genuinely important. I watched him interact with everyone from board members to janitors with the same level of respect and attention. He remembered personal details, acknowledged contributions, and treated each person as if their role was essential to the company's success. This observation led me to a profound realization. The deepest human need, beyond even the need for food and shelter, is the need to feel important. Everyone wants to matter, to know that their existence makes a difference, to feel valued and significant. Most people go through life feeling invisible and unimportant. When you can make someone feel genuinely important, you touch something so fundamental in their psychology that they never forget how you made them feel. I began experimenting with different ways to help people feel important without being patronizing or insincere. The key was recognizing that everyone truly is important in some way. They have unique experiences, knowledge, perspectives, or contributions that have value. My job wasn't to create false importance, but to recognize and acknowledge the real importance that already existed. One of my most powerful applications involved a young secretary who seemed invisible to everyone in the office. People treated her like office equipment, barely acknowledging her presence. I began asking for her input on various matters, thanking her for her efficiency, and recognizing how her attention to detail made everyone else's job easier. The transformation was remarkable. She began taking more initiative, offering helpful suggestions, and approaching her work with new enthusiasm. More importantly, her confidence grew, and she eventually advanced to a management position. By treating her as important, I had helped her become more important. I learned that making others feel important isn't about grand gestures, it's about consistent, small acts of recognition and respect. Using titles when addressing people, Dr. Johnson instead of just Johnson, asking for someone's opinion and listening to their response with genuine interest, acknowledging their expertise in their field, no matter how humble that field might seem to others. The most subtle but powerful technique I discovered was asking for advice. When you ask someone for their counsel, you're implicitly acknowledging that they have wisdom worth seeking. Even simple questions, like "What do you think would be the best approach here?" or "I'd value your perspective on this situation," can make someone feel consulted and important. I noticed that truly successful people were masters at this principle. They had the ability to make a taxi driver feel as important as a senator, a waitress as valued as a CEO. They understood that everyone has dignity that deserves respect, regardless of their position or circumstances. But making others feel important must be genuine to be effective. People have an instinct for detecting insincerity. False flattery or manipulative praise backfires because it makes people feel used rather than valued. The key is finding things that are genuinely worthy of recognition and expressing that recognition. Honestly, I learned to look for real contributions, however small. The receptionist who always greets visitors warmly is contributing to the organization's reputation. The maintenance worker who keeps the building clean is creating an environment where others can do their best work. The assistant who catches errors before they become problems is protecting the team's reputation. These contributions are real and worthy of recognition. One of my most challenging applications involved a difficult colleague who seemed determined to undermine my efforts. Instead of responding with hostility, I looked for ways to make him feel important and valued. I discovered he had expertise in an area where I was weak and began consulting him for advice. I publicly acknowledged his contributions when he helped with projects. Gradually, his antagonism decreased and eventually transformed into cooperation. By making him feel important and valued, I had removed the insecurity that was driving his difficult behavior. He no longer felt the need to diminish others because he felt significant himself. I discovered that this principle has compound effects. When you consistently make people feel important, they begin to act more importantly. They take on greater responsibility, show more initiative, and contribute more meaningfully. Your belief in their importance becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The business applications were profound. Employees who felt important worked harder, stayed longer, and contributed more ideas. Clients who felt valued became loyal advocates. Colleagues who felt respected became eager collaborators. Making others feel important wasn't just good human relations. It was good business strategy. But the most rewarding aspect of this principle was personal. When I focused on helping others feel important, I stopped worrying about my own importance. I found satisfaction in elevating others rather than promoting myself. This shift in focus from self-concern to service not only improved my relationships, but increased my own sense of fulfillment and purpose. Remember, everyone you meet feels superior to you in some way. They have knowledge you don't have, experiences you haven't had, perspectives you haven't considered. When you acknowledge this reality and treat them accordingly, you're not just being polite, you're recognizing a fundamental truth about human worth and dignity. The 10th and final law came to me through one of the most humiliating defeats of my career, a defeat that taught me more about human nature than all my victories combined. I was engaged in a heated debate with a prominent businessman about economic policy. I had facts, statistics, and logic on my side. I systematically demolished his arguments, proved his premises wrong, and demonstrated the flaws in his reasoning. Won the argument decisively. I also lost a potential client, damaged a valuable relationship, and created an enemy who would work against my interests for years to come. In proving him wrong, I had made him feel foolish, ignorant, and small. His pride was wounded beyond repair, and no amount of logic could heal that wound. That night, I realized I had made a fundamental error in understanding human psychology. I had assumed that people were logical creatures who would change their minds when presented with better evidence. Instead, I discovered that people are emotional creatures who use logic to justify decisions they've already made based on feelings, ego, and self-image. This realization led me to study the masters of persuasion throughout history. I examined how Abraham Lincoln handled disagreements, how Benjamin Franklin changed minds without creating enemies, how successful diplomats resolved conflicts without destroying relationships. They all shared one crucial insight: you can't force someone to agree with you, but you can create conditions where they might convince themselves. I learned that when you argue with someone, you're not just challenging their ideas, you're challenging their intelligence, their judgment, and even if you win the argument, you lose the relationship. The person you've defeated may say you're right, but they'll feel you're wrong. And feelings matter more than facts in human relations. The alternative, I discovered, was what I came to call the Socratic approach. Instead of arguing, I learned to ask questions that helped the other person examine their own position. Instead of telling them they were wrong, I helped them discover inconsistencies in their own thinking. Instead of attacking their conclusions, I encouraged them to explore the foundations of their beliefs. One of my most successful applications involved a potential business partner who held views that seemed completely unreasonable to me. My instinct was to correct his misconceptions with facts and logic. Instead, I said, "That's an interesting perspective. Help me understand how you arrived at that conclusion." This simple question opened a conversation that revealed the experiences and reasoning behind his position. As we talked, I asked gentle questions. Have you considered this aspect? What do you think might happen if? How do you think others might view this situation? Through this process, he began to see flaws in his own position without me ever directly challenging him. More importantly, he felt respected and heard. Throughout our conversation, I discovered that this approach works because it preserves the other person's dignity while creating space for new thinking. When someone doesn't feel attacked, they can consider alternative viewpoints without losing face. When they discover problems with their position themselves, they're much more likely to change their mind than if you point out those problems. The key insight is that people believe their own discoveries more than your assertions. When you tell someone they're wrong, you're asking them to admit error, which threatens their self-image. When you help them discover inconsistencies themselves, they can adjust their position while maintaining their sense of intelligence and competence. I learned to look for common ground before addressing differences. I agree with you that quality is important, I might say, before discussing how we might define quality differently. This approach starts with connection rather than conflict, making the other person more receptive to alternative viewpoints. But avoiding arguments doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations. Some issues are too important to ignore. I learned to separate the problem from the person, focusing on finding solutions rather than proving points. Instead of "you're wrong about this," I would say, "We seem to see this differently. Let's explore what's behind our different perspectives." I also discovered the power of admitting when I might be wrong, saying, "I could be mistaken about this," or "maybe I'm not seeing the whole picture." Disarms potential opposition and invites collaboration rather than competition. When you show vulnerability, Others feel safe to examine their own positions more. Honestly, the most sophisticated application involved learning to win by letting others win. In negotiations, I began looking for solutions that allowed the other party to feel successful while achieving my own objectives. This required creativity and genuine concern for their interests, but it consistently produced better outcomes than adversarial approaches. One memorable example involved a contract dispute, where both sides had dug into firm positions. Instead of arguing about who was right, I asked what would need to happen for both of us to feel good about moving forward. This question shifted the conversation from defending positions to exploring possibilities. We found a solution that neither side had initially considered, but that satisfied everyone's core needs. I learned that the strongest position in any disagreement is often curiosity rather than certainty. When you approach conflicts with genuine interest in understanding the other perspective, you often discover information that changes your own view. Even when you don't change your mind, the other person feels heard and respected, which maintains the relationship. The business applications were remarkable. Difficult negotiations became collaborative problem-solving sessions. Hostile clients became partners in finding solutions. Workplace conflicts transformed into opportunities for better understanding and improved processes. But the personal benefits were even greater. I stopped carrying the stress and tension that come from constant conflict. My relationships became more harmonious because people felt safe disagreeing with me. I learned more because I stopped defending my positions long enough to hear other viewpoints. Remember, a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still, but a person who convinces themselves through guided discovery becomes a true believer in the new position. The goal isn't to win arguments, it's to win friends, influence people, and find solutions that serve everyone's interests. After years of applying these 10 laws individually, I began to notice something remarkable happening in my life. The principles weren't just working in isolation, they were combining and reinforcing each other in ways that created exponential improvements in my relationships and influence. I discovered that mastering human relations isn't about perfecting individual techniques. It's about creating a systematic approach to treating people with genuine respect, interest, and appreciation. The transformation became most apparent when I started keeping a detailed journal of my interactions and their outcomes. I documented conversations, noted responses to different approaches, and tracked the long-term development of various relationships. What emerged was a clear pattern. The people who responded most positively to one principle were the same ones who responded to all the others, and the cumulative effect was far greater than the sum of its parts. Consider what happens when you apply multiple principles in a single interaction. You approach someone with genuine interest in their perspective. Remember and use their name throughout the conversation. Listen carefully to their concerns. Ask about their interests. Appreciate their contributions, and make them feel important, all while avoiding the temptation to argue or criticize. The result isn't just a pleasant conversation, it's the foundation of a meaningful relationship. I witnessed this compound effect most dramatically with a client relationship that had started poorly. Our initial meetings were tense and unproductive. He seemed suspicious of my motives and resistant to my suggestions. Instead of giving up or pushing harder, I decided to apply every principle systematically over time. I began by genuinely studying his business and personal interests, discovering his passion for collecting rare books. I made sure to pronounce his unusual surname correctly and used it respectfully throughout our conversations. I listened to his concerns without defending myself and asked for his advice on industry matters, where he had more experience than I did. When he shared insights, I appreciated his wisdom specifically and made him feel like the expert he truly was. I connected our business discussions to his goal of building a legacy company for his children. Most importantly, I never argued with his initial skepticism, but instead asked questions that helped him reach his own conclusions about our potential partnership. The transformation took months, but it was remarkable. The suspicious client became a trusted collaborator, then an enthusiastic advocate who referred multiple opportunities to me. More significantly, he often mentioned that working with me had changed his own approach to business relationships. The principles had created a positive influence that extended far beyond our immediate interaction. This experience taught me that these laws create what I came to call relationship momentum. Each positive interaction builds trust and goodwill that makes the next interaction more likely to succeed. People begin to see you as someone who truly cares about them, someone who can be trusted with important matters, someone whose company they enjoy and seek out. I also discovered that these principles work synergistically in group settings. When you consistently apply them in team meetings, social gatherings, or family situations, you become a catalyst for better interactions among everyone present. People relax when they feel appreciated and heard. Conflicts decrease when criticism is replaced with curiosity. Collaboration increases when everyone feels important and valued. The business applications of this compound effect were extraordinary. My network expanded organically as satisfied clients and colleagues introduced me to others. Opportunities began coming to me rather than me having to chase them. People started seeking my involvement in their projects because they enjoyed working with me, not just because of my professional skills, but I learned that consistency is crucial for this compound effect to work. Sporadic application of these principles can seem manipulative or confusing. People need to experience your genuine interest and appreciation repeatedly before they trust it completely. This requires making human relations a daily practice, not an occasional strategy. I developed what I called relationship habits, daily practices that ensured I was applying these principles consistently. Each morning, I would identify 3 people I would genuinely appreciate that day. I would set an intention to learn something new about someone I interacted with regularly. I would consciously practice listening more than speaking in every important conversation. The most profound aspect of the compound effect was how it changed me personally. As I focused consistently on making others feel valued and important, I stopped worrying so much about my own image and status. As I practiced genuine interest in others, I became less self-conscious and more confident in social situations. As I learned to appreciate rather than criticize, I became a more positive and optimistic person. I noticed that people began describing me differently. Instead of commenting on my intelligence or expertise, they talked about how I made them feel. They said I was someone they could trust, someone who really listened, someone who brought out their best qualities. This shift in how others perceived me opened doors that technical competence alone never could have. The compound effect also created what I called relationship insurance. When mistakes happened or misunderstandings arose, the goodwill I had built through consistent application of these principles protected and preserved important relationships. People were willing to give me the benefit of the doubt because they had experienced my genuine care and respect over time. I learned that these laws don't just improve individual relationships, they transform the entire environment around you. When you consistently treat people with appreciation, interest, and respect, you create a culture that encourages others to do the same. You become a positive influence that ripples outward through families, organizations, and communities. Ultimate realization was that these principles create a positive feedback loop. The better your relationships become, the more opportunities you have to practice and refine these skills. The more you practice, the more natural and genuine your application becomes. The more genuine you are, the more people trust and respond to you, This upward spiral can continue indefinitely, creating a lifetime of increasingly rich and meaningful relationships. Despite the power of these principles, I quickly learned that applying them consistently isn't always easy. Over the years of teaching and coaching thousands of people, I encountered the same obstacles repeatedly. Understanding these challenges and how to overcome them became essential for anyone serious about mastering human relations. The first and most common obstacle is dealing with genuinely difficult people. Those who seem determined to be unpleasant, uncooperative, or hostile regardless of how you treat them. Early in my practice of these principles, I met such a person, a business associate who responded to kindness with suspicion, to appreciation with sarcasm, and to genuine interest with contempt. My initial reaction was to abandon the principles with him and match his negative energy, but I realized this would only prove that my approach was conditional and superficial. Instead, I decided to apply the principles even more consistently, understanding that difficult people often behave badly because they feel unappreciated, unimportant, or unloved in other areas of their lives. I continued to treat this man with respect and interest, even when he didn't reciprocate. I looked for genuine things to appreciate about his work, even when his attitude was poor. I listened to his complaints without becoming defensive and asked questions that showed I was trying to understand his perspective. The breakthrough came after months of consistent application. During a particularly stressful project, his facade cracked, and he shared some personal struggles that explained his defensive behavior. My patient, consistent application of these principles had created enough safety for him to reveal his vulnerability. From that point forward, our relationship transformed completely. This experience taught me that difficult people often test your sincerity more rigorously than others. They've been hurt or disappointed before, so they're suspicious of anyone who treats them well. Your consistency in the face of their difficult behavior proves that your interest and appreciation are genuine, not strategic. The second major obstacle is the fear of appearing insincere or manipulative. Many people worry that consciously applying these principles will make them seem fake or calculating. This concern usually arises from a misunderstanding of what these principles actually are. They're not techniques for getting what you want from people. They're methods for genuinely appreciating and connecting with others. The key to overcoming this obstacle is understanding that these principles work best when your motivation is service rather than self-interest. When you apply them because you genuinely want to help others feel valued and important, your sincerity shows through naturally. When you apply them primarily to gain advantage, people sense the manipulation and respond accordingly. I learned to regularly examine my motivations. Am I trying to make this person feel important because they have something I want, or because everyone deserves to feel important? Am I listening to understand them better or to find ammunition for my own agenda? Honest self-reflection helps maintain the genuine spirit that makes these principles effective. The third obstacle is maintaining consistency when you're stressed, tired, or dealing with your own problems. It's easy to be kind and interested when you're feeling good, but much harder when you're overwhelmed or frustrated. Yet these are often the times when applying these principles matters most, both for others and for yourself. I developed strategies for maintaining my practice even during difficult periods. I created simple reminders notes on my desk, prompts in my calendar that helped me remember to apply these principles even when my natural inclination was to focus on my own problems. I learned that forcing myself to show genuine interest in others when I was feeling low often improved my own mood and perspective. Another common obstacle is dealing with cultural or generational differences. Some people worry that these principles won't work across different backgrounds or age groups. My experience has been the opposite. These principles are based on universal human needs that transcend surface differences. Everyone wants to feel appreciated, important, and understood, regardless of their background. However, the expression of these principles might vary culturally. Direct eye contact that shows interest in one culture might be considered disrespectful. In another, understanding cultural norms while maintaining the genuine spirit of appreciation and respect allows these principles to work universally. The obstacle that surprised me most was success itself. As people began responding more positively to me, I sometimes became overconfident and started taking shortcuts. I would assume that my reputation for being interested in others meant I could be less attentive in individual interactions. This complacency always backfired, reminding me that these principles require ongoing attention and genuine application. Time constraints present another significant challenge. People often say they don't have time to remember names, listen carefully, or show appreciation for others. But I've found that applying these principles actually saves time in the long run. Relationships built on mutual respect and appreciation require less maintenance and create more cooperation, reducing the time spent on conflicts and misunderstandings. The final obstacle is perfectionism, the belief that you must apply all these principles flawlessly all the time. This unrealistic expectation leads to frustration and abandonment when you inevitably fall short. I learned to view these principles as a practice, like physical exercise or musical training. Some days you perform better than others, but consistent effort over time produces remarkable results. When you make mistakes, and you will, the best approach is honest acknowledgement. If you've been inattentive or critical, simply apologizing and recommitting to better behavior often strengthens, rather than weakens relationships. People appreciate honesty about human failings more than pretended perfection. Remember, these obstacles are normal and temporary. Every person who has mastered human relations has faced and overcome similar challenges. The key is persistence, self-reflection, and genuine commitment to treating others with the respect and appreciation they deserve. The obstacles become stepping stones to deeper understanding and more authentic application of these life-changing principles. As my understanding of these principles deepened, I began to see how they could be adapted and applied to increasingly complex situations. The modern world presents challenges that didn't exist in my early years of teaching, but the fundamental human needs these principles address remain unchanged. People still want to feel appreciated, important, and understood, whether they're communicating face-to-face or through emerging technologies. One of the most sophisticated applications I developed involved large-scale organizational change. I was consulted by a company struggling with low morale and high turnover. Traditional approaches, new policies, financial incentives, management training had failed to address the underlying problem. When I observed the workplace culture, I discovered that employees at every level felt unappreciated and unheard. Instead of recommending structural changes, I suggested a systematic application of human relations principles throughout the organization. We trained managers to appreciate specific contributions rather than just criticize problems. We implemented systems for remembering and using employees' names consistently. We created opportunities for workers to share their interests and expertise with colleagues. Most importantly, we established practices for making every employee feel important, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. Janitors were consulted about building maintenance issues. Administrative assistants were asked for input on workflow improvements. Senior executives learned to listen to frontline workers' perspectives on customer needs. The transformation took time, but the results were remarkable. Productivity increased, turnover decreased, and employee satisfaction scores reached levels the company had never achieved. More significantly, the culture became self-reinforcing as employees began treating each other with the same appreciation and respect they were receiving from management. This experience taught me that these principles scale effectively when applied systematically. Individual relationships improve through personal application, but entire cultures can be transformed when organizations commit to treating all people with genuine appreciation and respect. I've also discovered powerful applications in customer relations that went far beyond traditional service approaches. Instead of just solving problems politely, businesses could create lasting loyalty by making customers feel genuinely important and valued. This meant remembering customer preferences, showing interest in their businesses or personal goals, and appreciating their loyalty specifically rather than generically. One retail client implemented what we called relationship retail, training staff to learn customers' names, remember their preferences, and show genuine interest in their lives. Sales associates were taught to listen for opportunities to make customers feel important rather than just pushing products. The result was dramatic increases in customer retention and word-of-mouth referrals. The principles also proved powerful in community and social settings. I worked with civic organizations struggling to engage volunteers and members. By applying appreciation, systematically recognizing specific contributions, making members feel important through meaningful roles, and showing genuine interest in their perspectives, these organizations experienced unprecedented participation and enthusiasm. But perhaps the most challenging application involved conflict resolution between groups with fundamentally different values or interests. I learned that even in highly polarized situations, these principles could create enough trust and understanding for productive dialogue. The key was starting with individual relationships before addressing group differences. When people from opposing sides experienced genuine appreciation and respect as individuals, they became more willing to consider alternative perspectives. This didn't eliminate disagreement, but it created space for disagreement without dehumanization. I also adapted these principles for written communication, which was becoming increasingly important as business and personal correspondence expanded. The same principles that worked in face-to-face interactions could be applied to letters, and later to telephone conversations. In written communication, I learned to use names frequently, express specific appreciation for the recipient's time and expertise, show genuine interest in their concerns, and make them feel important through respectful language and attention to their priorities. These adaptations made my correspondence more effective and helped maintain relationships across distances. The principles proved especially powerful in sales and negotiation contexts when applied with genuine intent to serve rather than manipulate. Instead of focusing on closing deals, I taught salespeople to focus on understanding customers' genuine needs and helping them feel important and appreciated throughout the process. This approach often took longer initially, but created much stronger long-term relationships and more sustainable business results. Customers who felt genuinely understood and valued became repeat buyers and enthusiastic referrers, creating a compound effect that far exceeded the results of high-pressure sales tactics. I discovered that these principles work particularly well in leadership succession and mentoring relationships. Leaders who consistently applied appreciation, genuine interest, and respect created environments where emerging leaders felt safe to take risks, share ideas, and develop their capabilities. The most advanced application involved what I called cultural bridge building, using these principles to create understanding between people from different backgrounds, generations, or belief systems. By focusing on universal human needs rather than surface differences, these principles could create connection even across significant cultural divides. The key insight was that these principles work because they address fundamental human psychology that transcends cultural variations. While the specific expressions of respect or appreciation might vary between cultures, The underlying need to feel valued and understood is universal. As communication technologies advanced, I realized these timeless principles would need constant adaptation to new mediums and methods of interaction. But the core insight remained constant. People respond positively to genuine appreciation, interest, and respect, regardless of how that appreciation is conveyed. The ultimate realization was that these principles represent something much larger than techniques for better relationships, represent a philosophy of human interaction based on recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This philosophy remains as relevant and powerful today as it was when I first discovered it, and it will continue to transform lives as long as human beings need to work and live together. After decades of teaching these principles, I learned that knowledge without application is worthless. Many people could recite the 10 laws perfectly, but continued to struggle with relationships because they never systematically put them into practice. The transformation comes not from understanding these principles intellectually, but from making them habitual responses in daily life. I developed what I called the daily practice, a systematic approach to integrating these principles into routine interactions until they became as natural as breathing. This wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic changes, but about consistent small actions that compound over time to create remarkable results. That the foundation of this practice was morning. In each day, I would identify specific people with whom I would apply these principles and specific situations where I would focus on particular laws. For example, I might decide to remember and use 3 new names that day, find genuine reasons to appreciate to colleagues, or practice deep listening in every important conversation. This intentional approach prevented the principles from becoming abstract ideals and made them concrete daily goals. I would write these intentions in a small notebook that I carried with me, creating accountability and helping me track my progress. The first habit I developed was what I called the appreciation practice. Every morning, I would identify 3 people I would genuinely appreciate that day. Not generic compliments, but specific recognition for actual contributions or qualities I had observed. I would make notes about what I appreciated and ensure I expressed this appreciation clearly and specifically. This practice trained me to notice positive qualities and contributions that I had previously overlooked. It also ensured that appreciation became a daily habit rather than an occasional thought. Over time, this constant focus on what people did well began to change how I saw the world. I became more optimistic and positive because I was actively looking for good things. The second habit focused on names and personal details. I created a simple system for recording and reviewing information about people I met regularly. Nothing elaborate, just names, key personal information, interests, and important events in their lives. I would review these notes before meetings or social events, ensuring I could greet people personally and ask about things that mattered to them. This practice transformed casual acquaintances into meaningful relationships. When I could ask someone about their daughter's graduation or their recent business trip, they felt remembered and valued. These small acts of attention created bonds that went far beyond surface-level interaction. The third habit involved what I called curiosity conversations. In every significant interaction, I committed to learning something new about the other person. This might be about their work, their interests, their challenges, or their goals. The key was genuine curiosity rather than polite questioning. This practice had multiple benefits. It made conversations more engaging for both parties, helped me understand others more deeply, and consistently provided new perspectives that enriched my own thinking. It also naturally led to the discovery of common interests and connection points that strengthened relationships. I developed specific practices for each of the 10 laws. For avoiding criticism, I created a 24-hour rule. Whenever I felt the urge to criticize someone, I would wait 24 hours and ask myself whether expressing that criticism would help them or just make me feel better. Most of the time, the urge passed, and I found more constructive ways to address issues. For listening, I practiced what I called mirror conversations, reflecting back what I heard to ensure understanding before sharing my own thoughts. "Let me make sure I understand what you're saying" became a regular phrase that dramatically improved my comprehension and made others feel heard. For making others feel important, I established the practice of asking for advice or input from people whose opinions I valued. This wasn't manipulation, but genuine recognition that everyone has expertise or perspective that could be valuable. "What do you think about ... became a powerful tool for both gathering insights and making people feel valued. I learned to measure progress, not just by outcomes, but by consistency of application. I tracked how often I used people's names, how frequently I expressed appreciation, how consistently I listened without interrupting. This focus on behavior rather than just results helped me identify areas where I needed more practice. One of the most important practices was regular self-reflection. Each evening, I would briefly review my interactions from that day. What went well? Where did I miss opportunities to apply these principles? How did people respond to different approaches? This reflection helped me learn from experience and continuously improve my application. I also developed practices for difficult situations. When facing conflict, I committed to finding at least one thing I could genuinely agree with before expressing disagreement. When dealing with difficult people, I would silently remind myself that their behavior probably reflected their own pain or insecurity rather than anything about me. The key to making these practices sustainable was starting small and building gradually. I didn't try to transform every interaction immediately. Instead, I focused on one principle at a time until it became natural, then added another. This incremental approach prevented overwhelm and allowed for genuine integration. I created accountability systems by sharing my goals with trusted friends and colleagues. I asked them to give me feedback about how I was doing and to remind me when I fell back into old patterns. This external accountability helped maintain consistency during challenging periods. The most powerful practice was what I called relationship investment time, dedicated periods for strengthening existing relationships rather than just maintaining them. This might involve writing appreciation notes, making phone calls to check on people, or finding ways to help others achieve their goals. I learned that these practices must be genuine to be effective. Going through the motions without real intent to serve and appreciate others actually backfires. The practices work because they help develop authentic appreciation and interest in other people, not because they provide techniques for manipulation. The ultimate goal was to make these principles so natural that they became part of my character rather than strategies I employed. When genuine appreciation, interest, and respect become automatic responses, you don't have to think about applying techniques. You simply interact with others in ways that naturally bring out their best qualities and create mutual respect and affection. Remember, these practices require patience and persistence. Changing deeply ingrained social habits takes time, and you will make mistakes along the way. The key is commitment to continuous improvement rather than expectation of immediate perfection. The compound effect of consistent small improvements creates transformation that surpasses anything achievable through sporadic grand gestures. As I reflect on a lifetime devoted to understanding and teaching human relations, I'm struck by a profound truth. The principles you've learned in this journey together aren't just tools for personal success. They're the foundation for creating a legacy that extends far beyond your own life. Every person you touch with genuine appreciation, sincere interest, and authentic respect becomes a carrier of that positive influence into their own relationships and communities. I've witnessed this ripple effect countless times throughout my career. Students who learned to apply these principles didn't just improve their own lives, they transformed their families, their workplaces, and their communities. A manager who learned to appreciate rather than criticize created a team culture that outlasted his own tenure. A parent who practiced genuine interest in their children raised adults who naturally treated others with respect and kindness. A salesperson who focused on serving rather than selling built relationships that generated business for decades. The most remarkable example came from a young teacher who attended one of my courses early in her career. She applied these principles in her classroom, creating an environment where students felt valued, heard, and important. Those students went on to become leaders, parents, and professionals who carried those same principles into their own spheres of influence. 30 years later, I received letters from some of those former students describing how their experience in her classroom had shaped their approach to relationships throughout their lives. This is the true power of these principles. They multiply exponentially. When you consistently treat people with genuine appreciation and respect, you don't just improve those specific relationships. You model a way of being that others observe and often adopt. You create ripples of positive influence that spread far beyond your direct contact with individuals. But this legacy requires conscious cultivation. It's not enough to apply these principles sporadically or only when it's convenient. The transformative power comes from making them your default way of interacting with every person you encounter, from family members to strangers, from those who can help you to those who cannot. I've learned that your legacy is built in the small moments as much as the grand gestures. The way you treat a waitress when you're stressed reveals your character as clearly as how you handle a major business negotiation. The patience you show with a struggling employee matters as much as your strategic decisions. The genuine interest you show in a child's story carries as much weight as your professional accomplishments. The principles work because they align with the deepest truths about human nature. Every person, regardless of age, background, or circumstances, wants to feel valued, understood, and important. When you consistently meet these fundamental needs in others, you create an environment where people naturally flourish. You become known not just for what you achieve, but for how you make others feel. I've watched people transform, not just their relationships, but their entire life trajectories through consistent application of these principles. A struggling businessman became a beloved community leader. A distant parent rebuilt relationships with their children. A harsh manager became a mentor who developed numerous successful leaders. In each case, the change began with a simple decision: to treat others with genuine appreciation and respect. The most fulfilling aspect of teaching these principles has been seeing students surpass their teacher. People who initially came to my courses seeking better sales techniques or career advancement discovered something much more valuable: a way of living that creates meaning, connection, and fulfillment, regardless of external circumstances. Your opportunity now is to carry these principles forward into your own sphere of influence. Start with the people closest to you, your family, your colleagues, your friends. Notice how they respond when you apply genuine appreciation, sincere interest, and authentic respect. Watch how your relationships deepen and strengthen. Observe how your own sense of satisfaction and purpose grows as you focus on serving rather than being served. But don't stop there. Look for opportunities to extend these principles into your community, your profession, your industry. Become known as someone who brings out the best in others, who creates environments where people feel valued and heard, who builds bridges instead of walls. The world needs these principles now more than ever. In an age of increasing division, superficial communication, and technological isolation, the ability to connect authentically with other human beings becomes both rare and precious. You have the opportunity to be a beacon of genuine human connection in a world that often feels cold and impersonal. Remember that mastering these principles is a lifelong journey, not a destination. I'm still learning, still discovering new applications, still finding ways to deepen my appreciation and understanding of others. The beauty of this path is that it offers unlimited opportunity for growth and contribution. Your legacy won't be measured by your achievements alone, but by the lives you've touched, the people you've helped feel important, the relationships you've enriched through genuine care and interest. Long after your professional accomplishments are forgotten, people will remember how you made them feel. The 10 laws I've shared with you have the power to transform not just your relationships, but your entire approach to life. They can turn ordinary interactions into meaningful connections, convert adversaries into allies, and create a positive influence that extends far beyond anything you can imagine. The choice is yours. You can treat these principles as interesting ideas to consider, or you can make them the foundation of how you interact with every person you meet. You can use them occasionally when it's convenient, or you can make them your consistent way of being in the world. I challenge you to choose the path of consistent application. Start today with the next person you encounter. Show genuine interest in their thoughts and feelings. Appreciate something specific about their contributions. Make them feel important and valued. Listen with your full attention. Avoid the temptation to criticize or argue. Watch what happens. Notice how they respond. Feel how it changes you. Then do it again with the next person and the next. Build these principles into your daily routine until they become as natural as breathing. The world will be a better place because of your commitment to treating others with the appreciation, respect, and genuine interest they deserve. And you will discover that in helping others feel important and valued, you have found the secret to a life of meaning, connection, and lasting influence. This is my final gift to you, not just knowledge, but an invitation to become part of a legacy that has been transforming lives for generations and will continue long after we're gone. The principles are timeless because they're based on timeless truths about human nature. Your application of them can create ripples of positive influence that will touch lives you'll never even know about. Make it your mission. Make it your legacy. Make it your gift to the world.